Hi, and welcome to Black on the Mat, the space where culture, community, and yoga intersect through our lived experiences. We're your host. I'm Danielle.
And I'm Seisha. Join us on this journey to bring representation and shed light on often overlooked stories on the yoga mat.
We're creating an accessible roadmap into yoga for Black people, building a community in this predominantly white space.
And letting folks already into yoga know that we're here.
Welcome back to Black on the Mat. Today, we are so honored to have on with us Alicia, which you may know as Afro Yoga Queen. And we are super excited to talk about the concept of yoga and Christianity and how they go together, and even if you think that they don't.
Because many people don't.
Right. Alicia, please introduce yourself. Tell us about you and how you got into yoga.
Hey, y'all. I am so honored to be here. So first of all, I'd just like to thank y'all for having a platform where you get to consistently serve the community because it's so needed. My personal journey getting here into this place where I've been practicing and teaching over a decade now, having trained over 1,000 hours and taught over 4,000 hours of yoga, it's really been a journey. And what originally got me to even step into my first yoga class was a process of approximately a year to 2 years. I was diagnosed with lupus in 2009, and that's where I really started to first experience myself and my breath. And it happened really out of not having an option. I had swollen ankles and feet. And so like with the inflammation from that diagnosis that I had, I sometimes couldn't get out of bed, and I sometimes couldn't see because my retinas were so swollen. So I would just lay in the bed and breathe. And instead of resisting and feeling sorry for myself and beating myself up for, the 100th time, one day I just decided, let me just take a few deep breaths. And I had an experience with myself unlike I'd had in a very long time, or maybe even ever. I, for the first time, actually appreciated taking a deep breath. And so that was my first experience with yoga. I then started to try to find what would really help me to recreate that. I didn't know what yoga was per se. I just know that when I was laying in my bed and taking deep breaths, I felt better. And I couldn't really explain why. I didn't really know, was it just because I stopped like gripping, I actually relaxed for the first time. I didn't really know, what exactly was happening. So I set out on this journey to figure out what would help me to feel better. And I had been on pain pills and taking like 8 pills a day because I was in so much pain. Like, to tell you the type of pain that I was in, standing on my feet was excruciating. So taking a step was just not happening for me. And I was going back and forth between pain, and then I take the meds and it'd be like numb. So it's oscillating between those two, pain and numb, pain and numb. I mean, like my feet didn't fit in regular shoes. My face didn't look like this. So as much as I, enjoy practicing self-care, looking in the mirror and saying nice things to myself now, back in the day, it was just not that. It was not this face. It was not this body. It just wasn't this experience. And when I set out, I started to ask people that I knew, like, oh, have you heard about yoga? I was doing research, not only on the diagnosis that I was given, but also just figuring out, what are other ways that people go beyond just taking more pills. And so I asked somebody about yoga, and it was someone that I knew from church. And her first response was like, oh, no, that yoga stuff, they be playing to the devil. You better be careful with that. You might get possessed by the evil spirits. And I was just like, oh, well, I don't want that. I don't, that sounds kind of scary, So I've decided in that moment, like, okay, well, maybe that yoga thing isn't for me. I'll try something else. So I went and tried CrossFit. And I mean, I have a dance background. And so the CrossFit was a little aggressive for me. And then I was like, okay, well, maybe not that. Let me just try this boot camp. Because I knew somebody that had a gym. I was like, okay, this is still not my cup of tea. So I tried running. My knees and my body are like, girl, this all of these things would lead to soreness, which the soreness reminded me so much of the feelings that I was taking the pills for. And it was just like, this is not adding up. So I was like, all right, let me try something that's gonna be easy. Let me do swimming. And then my hair was like, girl, you tripping. And so finally, I got actually gifted a week of unlimited yoga. And I was just like, oh, okay. All right. So if I go in there, but I pray the whole time, maybe I won't be possessed by evil spirits. So I had a plan. So I went in, had my yoga mat. I mean, I was gifted like the whole thing. So I was just like, there's no excuse. Like, let me just go in there. So every time we brought our hands back together, it was like, please, God, all right, protect me, form a hedge of protection. Like, I was just very, very aware. Like, even walking in the door, I'm like, I don't see anything in here that looks like evil. And after the yoga class, I was just like, I felt so good. And I really was curious. I'm like, what were they talking about? Nobody in here said anything about the devil. Nobody in here was, speaking in tongues, no evil spirits. I didn't see anybody get possessed. Like, so I was just like, I guess the coast is clear. And I went back and it was unlimited. So I started going back 2, 3 times a day. I mean, it was feeling so good that I was taking less pain meds. And it was just like, this is it. I mean, my joints, I just felt so good. I was like, yes, why did this person tell me that it was evil? I was very confused, but I thought maybe, maybe it's just some type of disconnect, or maybe that was her experience. I never actually went back and asked her again, but all I knew was that for me and my body, it worked for me. And so I kept doing it and kept doing it and kept doing it. And eventually it started to change other parts of my life and not just the physical. And so here we are.
We talk about the benefits in, I think, every single episode. We said, yeah, and this is another benefit, and this is another benefit. And so for those of us that didn't know, like, you had this battle with lupus, and for it to lead you to this amazing place in, well, this is your career, this is what you do, this is what you talk about. That is not only amazing that it helped you with your medical diagnosis, but building this life, which is very similar to the conversation Danielle and I had about how this has led me to build this life, right? Like, finding that that clarity, that peace, that like sense of self with your body, all of that is absolutely amazing. And so I know you said you never went back to that woman specifically, but do you generally receive concerns about the concept of Christianity when it comes to doing yoga?
Absolutely. Actually, so at the same church, I actually don't remember who that woman was. So maybe I have talked to that woman since then, because I did start a yoga program at the church. But essentially, when we started the program, there were so many people in there that like, look, I tried everything else. Like, yes, exactly, exactly. And when we get into the practice, we really get to focus on this God-given breath. Let us experience it at a different level. This God-given body, this vessel, let us experience it. Let us heal by moving. Let us move our bodies in a way that feels good. And that has been, it really feels like a full circle. I wish I could remember who it was, but maybe she's not even here anymore. If she was that turned off to natural remedies, who knows? Like, 'cause she was an elder, so I don't remember who exactly she was.
It's interesting because I feel like I know a lot of my relatives are Christian, most of them are Baptist. I was raised Catholic, but I've heard from different people in the Black community like, oh no, I don't do that yoga. I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian. I'm like, well, I'm a Christian too, and I'm still doing this yoga thing. What are some common misconceptions you feel like people have about yoga and Christianity?
Yes, this is a good one. I hear very often that yoga is evil and that it was rooted in the old traditional Indian religions. And so that fact that it has overlapped with other cultures and other practices, that influences the reality of the current practice. And so now this current practice is somehow contradictory with Christian ideals, Christian morals, Christian practices. And so if you are somehow connecting to your flesh, because I feel like that's really where the root of it is that in Christianity, we're really taught from a perspective of the flesh is considered evil, and anything that's divine, heavenly, is not of the flesh.
Mhm.
And I find this fascinating because I speak more than one language. I speak French fluently, and I actually read the Bible in French as well. And so a lot of times the translations in different languages can give more insight into what actually the statement means. So in one of the things that we've been studying in my church, we are a study-based church. And so we do look at a lot of the scripture. And so one of the things that we've been studying is the fact that our spiritual warfare against the enemy, the devil, is not a worldly fight. And so in the English translations, it does talk a lot about this is not the fight of the flesh. This is a spiritual fight. In the French translation, it says this is not only a fight of the flesh. This is a fight that includes the spirit. And so I feel that a lot of times because of, it's kind of like telephone. If you tell somebody something on one end and then like it eventually makes it down to that 50th person, 50 generations later, whatever came from the person before them, that's the message that they get. And so it's not that they necessarily mean to be exclusionary of these practices that could actually help people get over the things that they're struggling with, help them keep them from being in unnecessary pain. It's just that the information that they are basing their studies on a day-to-day basis is a translation. And so a lot of times, especially depending on which one they use, they can just be really focused on that. So I feel like that's a lot where a lot of the misconception can be rooted for sure.
And I mean, that makes a lot of sense, especially the level of like just poeticness that you read in French and French writing is versus like American, very straightforward English, you know? And so because of that, I'm wondering, are there insights that you have about how actually these spiritual principles align with Christianity versus combat them?
Yes. Okay. So y'all are familiar, and I know a lot of yogis are familiar with the 8 limb practice. And it really talks about how yoga in itself is not a one-sided practice. It's not, even though us as humans, because we are so visual, like we have these eyes right at the top of our body, in the front of our face, our brain uses the information from our eyes to decide, are we safe? Is this okay? Is this going to help me to stay alive? Am I going to be accepted by my tribe? And it's like this whole survival component that we don't even consciously process. Like our brain does all that for us. So just the type of understanding, like when we misunderstand or we don't understand something, our brain just automatically puts it in the negative because it could potentially harm us. And that would keep us from surviving, keep our species from continuing on, and our cells desire to reproduce. On the fact of the correlation, well, when we talk about, there it goes, the 8 limb practice and the holistic perspective of the practice, where we have the breath. And the breath is something, I mean, it is what starts our life. When our body has no more breath, we are no longer considered to be alive. And the breath is something that is talked about as being specifically given from God to man. And so our emphasis on the life force energy of pranayama, of using this breath to experience our body, experience our life force at a different capacity. That is one way where there's a lot of correlation. And there are some observances of things not to do, things to do. And so that correlates with this, the idea that as a human being, it is our ability and responsibility to make choices and be decisive on how we choose to use our body, as opposed to just doing any old thing. There are these regulations that are provided in the yoga practice, and similarly, there are regulations provided in religious practices as well. So there's some correlation there. And then as far as the physical element, I don't actually have the idea that there are not any pictures of us doing yoga in the Bible, but there is a lot of talk about meditating on the Word of God, and that reflection, that concentration, that experiential description of experiencing our life as more than just what we can see in front of us. And so that really does speak to, like, it doesn't say in there, hey, do yoga because that is from God, but it says, hey, meditate and reflect on God's power. Like, meditate and reflect on how he created everything around us to take care of us. And so that, for me, it just really speaks to the alignment that is there between us living our life as yogis and being conscious and aware of all those things and those observances, but also how that can plug in seamlessly into what we do, how we show up as human beings, as people who recognize that there's more than just this physical body. There's, so much more in this realm, in this universe, and in this creation, essentially.
I love that. And I love how you talked about the fact that the Bible talks about meditate on his word. And so that seems an easy way to see how yoga could enhance someone's spirituality and their belief in God or whatever they believe in. What are other ways you feel like yoga can help enhance someone's Christianity or spirituality or just religious beliefs?
Ooh, I definitely can give you one, because I used to be a road rage person. And now people who know the current Alicia and people who know old Alicia, there's clearly two different people. And although I was raised in the church, I was raised where it was like, okay, we in church, I was in the choir, we did all the services. And then as soon as we get in the parking lot, I'm like, oh, let me put on the secular radio. Like, oh, finally. Like, woo. And so I feel like there's a lot of time and place segmentation in the lives of people who are observers of the lifestyle and the beliefs and the faith. And so what I realized is that when I started practicing yoga, it actually taught me how to bring discipline, how to bring awareness, how to bring consciousness into all parts of my life, including when I was on the road and somebody cut me off. Instead of calling them everything but their name, I can take a deep breath. And I can be grateful that I had the ability, I saw them in time, that my brakes work well, that, all of the things. It's a completely different lifestyle, and it really emphasizes bringing it full circle. And I feel like, a lot of times for Christianity, it's very easy to be a Sunday Christian, or, even not, like for myself in the past, it wasn't even the full day of Sunday. It's like at church, had that Sunday best on. And that really was like the time and place when I was on my best behavior and I was my highest self. in that old life. And now to really bring in yoga in all parts of my life, it allows me to be more in alignment and not just have to think, oh, what would Jesus do? But in reality, this now becomes how I live my life. I don't feel the need to go off on people. I don't feel the need to even live in the ways that, were detrimental to my well-being, that were hurting my physical body like I did in the past. I make better decisions that help me to take care of myself. And so I feel like that is like essentially how we can live at our highest according to how God gave us this body to take care of.
I know we honestly, part of this of our programming here for Black on the Mat is discussing yoga and Christianity, yoga and other religions and how they impact regular life. And one thing that I feel like when we have religious conversations, when you have real religious conversations that are study-based, that are research-based and things like that, you go back into the text, you see how well they align so often as far as like beliefs and thoughts and processes. And I fully feel like the yamas and niyamas are very much a copy, a representation, their own version of what we have as like our commandments and our different like rules that we have. Like there's, you're supposed to be
Exactly.
benevolent.
Do not steal. It's like, come on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. Like there's a
Yeah,
lot of these
absolutely.
parallels.
Absolutely, for sure. It's so important to realize that there in the past, and this is something that I feel just like historically, when people realized how people were not really looking at it from a religious perspective in the past. They just did not have the time to practice yoga. They were too busy working and trying to make ends meet. And then prior to that, so within the time of slavery, they just did not have leisure time to occupy themselves with taking deep breaths. They were too busy doing the task and completing the things that were required of them. And so there was a disconnect, even though the writings on the pyramids do depict different positions of body and different ways to take care of self. There was that disconnect of where this is a time where you're in focus mode. And it really did not give way for the quote unquote leisure activities. And it was set apart, kind of like reading was. Like slaves weren't like, hey, let's come on, learn your ABCs. Come on over here and sit down and learn how to hold a pencil. Like it just didn't have the allotted time or place to do that if you looked a certain way or if you fit a certain criteria. And so there did create a disconnect from our people and practicing self-care because we were now eating all of the things that were the scraps of the table and like all those different kinds of things did create a disconnect from self-care. And then when slavery was over, there was an emphasis on really creating a negative connection with Black people. And so if you don't love yourself, then why would you take time to enjoy a deep breath just for you? And so there really were these behind the scenes motions and initiatives that were put in place that effectively allowed the people of color to not desire, to not have the ability, because there were things that now it was expensive to practice yoga, so they didn't even have the means to practice it. There wasn't yoga readily available. It wasn't like now where you can just open up YouTube and practice. So there were these different things that really allowed the disconnect to happen. And so I feel like that is often mistaken or just jumbled together with the fact that people see the hand positions and they know that there's a history there that went all the way back and even beyond India. People think that it was originating in India. It went back even beyond India, even beyond the physical borders that were created in Africa. I mean, intuitively, people didn't have devices to distract them. People didn't have books that they were writing. I mean, when people's bodies didn't feel good, they would like move their body. They would take deep breaths. Like they weren't just like all the time scrolling on their phone. So there was already some type of self-connection that was established even from the first humans. And so, you know, I definitely can go way into it, but I'm just gonna leave it right there.
But I think that's good because I feel like there's people who come into class and think, oh, the Sanskrit, I don't know what you're trying to get me. You're getting me to chant some, some evil situations or the mudras and stuff like that. People think that all the time. And so I'm curious, what advice do you give to someone who maybe like, I kind of feel like this yoga thing might be for me, but I feel like it still is conflict in my Christian beliefs. Like what advice do you give to those people?
Oh, that's so good. I'm so glad you said that because language is something that can be confusing. I mean, if we think about Babel and when everybody was speaking the same language and had these plans of all these things they were going to do, then all of a sudden no one's able to communicate. They don't have the ability to comprehend what the other person is saying. It creates confusion, it creates anger. Like there's a lot of that comes up when there's a misunderstanding or there's an ability to understand each other. And so I definitely realize that in our American culture, it's not common for people to speak multiple languages. Whereas when I lived abroad, I mean, me with my, 2.5, because I don't say I'm fluent in Spanish. However, I can definitely get around and get the things that I need to do. And when I was abroad, me with my 2.5 languages, I'm in a conversation with somebody who speaks 8 languages. So this there were these creation of the way like American language or English was really the language to speak. And so then we don't know how to communicate in other places. So I would definitely encourage someone who is feeling a little bit iffy about Sanskrit, go to a teacher who teaches in English. I mean, if you're a teacher who is desiring to teach Sanskrit, study it in depth so that you can break it down and take the etymology of the word and really explain it to people. Because especially in our culture, and this is what I tell my yoga teacher trainees all the time, you have to think about who you're teaching to. Because I'm going to teach something completely different to my husband who is military veteran, law enforcement. I'm going to teach completely different to him who's, he does yoga occasionally. I mean, we do naked yoga, but it's not like a full class situation. He's not going somewhere public to lay out his mat. However, if I have a yoga teacher that is familiar with the studies, I'm going to be more likely to use different Sanskrit depending on the type of class that I'm teaching. I'm not going to teach a class to someone who can barely get out of bed. I'm not teaching them power yoga. So when I work with my teachers, I specifically tell them, if you're going to use Sanskrit, if you're going to do ohms at the beginning of your class, explain what it is. Because people who do not understand, they do not know what it is, our instinct. So that's why I was saying about the mind, our instinct is to be fearful. And so then we go down that loophole, like, oh, all these people, like, why are they ohming? Like, what does this mean? Are they trying to wake some evil spirits? Like, it can be culturally exclusionary because our people are very quick, very smart. If you explain to them maybe the history of the word or how, this first part of the word means this second part of the word means this. And so that's why you have, Adho Mukha Svanasana. Like you can explain things and maybe don't explain the entire class, but you could go in and teach them one Sanskrit word every class. Really keep it simple and digestible. And before you know it, your class is going to be more familiar, more easeful in their practice, and it'll be something that can be really enjoyable. And I do encourage teachers, if you're going to teach new students that are of color, definitely use little to no Sanskrit if possible, just so that they can have the experience of yoga without being in their heads. And so
Amazing.
that's where the teacher part of the practice comes in. Because I always say there's two practices going on in a classroom. There's a student practice and there's a teacher practice. And the teacher practice includes your breath, and it includes the things that you say. It includes your practice that you've planned out even before you stepped in the room. And so you just are really cognizant of how you show up so that you create the type of space that allows them to have an enjoyable self-connection experience.
No, I love that. I think that that makes a whole lot of sense. And I really hope that people listening to this are feeling more enticed, like more ready and more available and open to the concept of yoga. Something else that I know that you do is you have your ongoing research project. Can you tell us more about that? How does that play into you teaching and what you do?
Yes, this is actually a passion of mine. When I published my first book and I leveraged that to make six figures, I felt like, huh, it's kind of like when the person told me that yoga was evil. And so I was kind of afraid. Like people had been saying for a long time, like, oh, yoga teachers are broke. And I realized that becoming an author, but not just, having a book, like using it to sell something of value in the world. And I was able to then, because I was serving, then receive benefit from the value that I was bringing. It really opened my eyes. And so I was just thinking, like, how can I bring more value to the world? And so I'm now working on my second book, which, depending on when you're listening to this recording, may already be out. And I was just like, what I really love is studying numbers and data and seeing how, like, what we say is this is another thing about our people. Like, we like to see proof. Like, show me. And so that's what really got research to be exciting for me, because not only did I research about how to get better, how to, relieve the symptoms of lupus, I also was looking in and seeing like, well, people of color have the highest rates of this and that and this and that. But people of color are also the lowest practitioners. And well, depending on when you watch this recording, that may not be true, hopefully. But, just seeing those types of things really had me curious about how to create that change. And so starting research and actually working on 1,000-hour certification. So it's beyond the Yoga Alliance standard 500-hour. I got my 500-hour like 4 years ago. And so it's just like, is this really it? This can't be it. Like, nah, that's not it. And so I really have been creating my own passion of studying the numbers. Like, how does my blood pressure affected when I practice? How is my, blood work affected when I practice? So I have been studying it on my own body, and then just based off of people asking me about my journey, started to share and allow other people to participate as well. And so just from my personal experience and enjoyment of that, like, cool yoga nerd that I've always been in my life. I mean, I've always been a nerd, but I just like added the yoga on, and like I said, in the last decade or so. And so just bringing that element has been so exciting that I've been really fortunate to have, medical doctors come and work with me, clinical therapists come and work with me. And so like, I love, love, love all the people who have really found a passion for seeing how things really work behind the scenes. Like, yes, you feel better, but what are the numbers? Like, yeah, let's take it. And so we're in the process of creating the first volume of, it's a combination of like chicken soup for the Black person's soul and peer-reviewed yoga research. And so we're actually right now interviewing, and yes, it's an ongoing process, and we have multiple volumes planned out. So we're in the process of taking applicants for those who are interested in not only getting their research, publishing their work as an anthology with our team, but also getting the 1,000-hour certification. So it's like, really excited about it. So if you're watching this and interested, please do reach out. I'm happy to give you an application to see if you're eligible.
I think that's great. And it's needed. I think that's needed in such a way that people need to know more, especially us. I strongly believe that we need receipts. We are always looking for receipts of how this works. And so, even that being said, where can people find resources on, how to explore yoga and Christianity? Like, what receipts can they be like, okay, pastor, this is why I'm practicing? Because someone's going to need that. They're going to need that receipt.
Need that. I'm like, maybe that needs to be something that I work on. I haven't published any personal work on yoga and Christianity. I've done a couple podcasts on yoga and Christianity, but I definitely feel like that needs to happen. I love that you said that. I've only ever talked about it and done my own personal research, but yeah, that is very cool. So if you're watching this and you would like to get more information about it, DM me, because I am writing myself a note and I'll be putting together my resources, and then I'll be happy to share.
Please do. And we could also put it in the show notes once you do that.
Ooh.
Because again, people need those receipts. We want to make sure there's no barriers, and not having that receipt and you have that person saying you're going to hell. That person going to hell, telling you you're going to hell, will make you kind of feel like, well, maybe I shouldn't do this.
Yes.
Alicia, as we bring this all to a close, can you just share with us, tell us and our listeners where we can find you, where we can find more from you, what you have coming up?
Yes. Okay, so please connect with me on YouTube if you want to do more in-depth studies, any type of yoga research, yoga information. I do like to put on YouTube just to make it more accessible, even if you Google. So you can find me at Afro Yoga Queen on YouTube. And then if you are an Instagram person, you can find me at Afro Yoga Queen on IG. And please DM me any questions you have. I'm happy to support any type of fellow yoga nerds, because that's my vibe. And then as far as projects coming up in the immediate future, I do, like I said, have my second book coming out, and it's called the Yoga Entrepreneur Workbook. So look out for more information about getting yourself a copy. And then I am in current process of doing research. So if you like to actually participate in the research and not necessarily just be a researcher, if you like to participate in the research, please do DM me the word research on IG, and I'm happy to give you additional information about how you can participate and be a part of us changing the culture, like you said, with the receipts.
Need the receipts. Thank you so much for being here. This has been such an informative conversation. I feel like I'm going to be giving this one to my dad, who's like, yoga's not for me. That's the devil's work. And so I'm like, here you go. So thank you.
Yes, and with the receipts in it.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I hope also we want to invite all the listeners to leave your stories below. Has this happened to you? Have you questioned your Christianity getting into yoga, or have you had an experience like this? We would love to know what those things are stopping you so we can continue to knock them right out of the park.
On that note, we'll see you guys next week. Ciao.
Thank you for having me. Bye. Bye.
Thank you for joining us today on Black on the Mat.
Let's continue connecting, sharing our stories, and sowing the benefits of having a yoga practice in your life.
Subscribe to Black on the Mat on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
I'm Seisha, and you can find me at Thick Thigh Yoga on all social media platforms and thickthighyoga.com.
I'm Danielle, and you can find me at Hellowell with Danielle on IG, YouTube, and hellowellwithdanielle.com.